We're going to start talking about and using the versioning tools that SharePoint provides. The advantage of using the SharePoint tools is when you are using file names to manage your datetime stamps to keep track of revisions, you end up with a lot of files laying around that you no longer need. By using versioning, you keep the current file available for everybody to use, but it is possible to go back and see previous versions when necessary. And there are a couple of ways to handle versioning, and there are a couple of ways of handling the ability to lock files, to check them in and check them out, which also has an impact on versioning. So let me go to an illustration of versioning. When somebody loads a file for the first time, that file sits in the library, and somebody may come in and say, well, look, wait a minute, the property owners are missing from this drawing sheet. So you send it back to whoever generated the plot from the CAD system. Say, give us more layers. Well, they end up giving you levels that have contour lines as well as the property, and it also is missing the, careful, this isn't an official document. So then you send about and they get another one and they put it on the system. And you notice that these sheets, these files are just stacking up. They are not being deleted. You actually have the ability to view the stack further down. Somebody then goes in and says, oh, I've got to look at this. It's worth checking out. And they go in and they make an edit using a markup tool. As soon as they save that, it is a new version saved with the markup. Somebody then goes out and proceeds to edit the file, fix the problem, copies a new version in, overwriting the previous. Somebody else makes further changes and overwrites the previous, and I don't know if you noticed, but down at the bottom, that initial version disappeared. There are a few libraries, discipline libraries, that have the limit set to 4 of the number of preserved revisions. Some have them set to 5, and some have them unset, and you're going to have 20 or 30 versions out there. But in any case, the versions that you have, you can go back and look at. So say the person who did the markup, they can take a peek and say, did they do their markup? They can temporarily look at an earlier version. They could actually restore this version above the others if they wished, or they can just discard it and go back to what is the official current version. So how do we do that? When you put a file in the system, it saves a version. But save can mean different things in different contexts. Anytime you save a file that you're working on in the SharePoint library, it's a new version. Well, almost any time, because when you overwrite, the save works a little differently. Anytime you check in a file you've checked out, that's a new version. Only the last save of a checked out file is preserved for you, and that means that if you just open a file, start editing, save it, keep editing, save it, editing, keep editing, and save it, you've actually created 3 versions every time you save. If before you started you checked out that file, what you're essentially doing is 2 things. You're locking the file so nobody else can edit it, and you're also making the version of the file that you've checked out the only one that people can see. So you can go in, make some changes, save it. You can go home, come back the next day, a week later, make some more changes, save that. Nobody can see them but you. Continue to make saves, and it's only when you're ready to release the new document to other people that you check it back in. At that point, that is the new version, and all of the intermediate saves are only preserved for you, and they're not creating a new version every time. You have the ability to keep the lock when you check a document back in so that everybody can see the information you've changed, but nobody can change it. You have the ability to lock a file, and as long as you're holding that lock, nobody can change it. Now, if you get hit by a bus, we can go back to the previous version that you checked out and discard all the work you've done, but nobody can see the work you've done if you have not checked it in. So there's the save anytime you put a new document in that you've edited someplace else. There's a save that creates a version when you have edited a file in the SharePoint library and saved it again. And there's the save when you check a file out and then check it back in. Now it is also possible, though it sometimes gets confusing, to actually check a file out, work on it someplace else, and then once you've saved it on your local workstation, for example, putting it back in and overwriting the version there and then checking it back in so everybody else can see it. It's likely what you'll do if you're producing a drawing or something like that, where you have the currently available drawing in there. You may or may not choose to check that out, but any work you're doing is done in MicroStation, and then it's only when you produce a PDF plan that you then put that back into SharePoint for other people to see. You may choose to check it out so you're the only person that can put a new version in, or you may allow other people to do it. It all depends on who grabs the lock first. And there is a way of seeing who has a lock. Now, I mentioned the fact that you can go back and look at a previous version. There are two places you can get to version history. One is by clicking on the ellipsis for the file, and then the ellipsis for the pop-up and clicking on version history. You also have, under the Files tab, the version history button. Notice in either of those views that what you can click on depends on the state of the current file. Once you've clicked on version history, this is what the pop-up looks like. If you click to the right of the date timestamp, you get a View, Restore, and Delete option. Restoring an older version, if we click on Restore here, we will create version 4, and it will be a copy of version 2. If we click on View, what do you think you're going to see? You won't see version 2, you'll see the properties of version 2. In order to actually see what is in the version, you have to click on the date timestamp itself. Now, overwriting, I've already mentioned. Overwriting, putting a new file in place of the old with the same file name, automatically updates the version, and it keeps all the properties. Now, the only time that it really is necessary to put a version name in a file name is if you want to preserve that in perpetuity and then continue to work on new versions and have a current version supersede that, but still be able to publish the previous version. I have never found unchecking the added new version to existing files to be useful, and frequently I get into an infinite loop of you need to do this, but you can't do this sort of thing. I'll let you read this about the different points. This is a summary of the check-in, check-out, and versioning. We'll move on. Give it a go. Moving on. I'm not going to have you do this exercise, but in some other sessions I've mentioned that in some libraries you can have multiple editors of a Word document. And the way it works is this: when two people or more edit a file, as soon as the second person starts editing, everyone gets a notice down here in the corner of who is doing the editing. What ends up happening is every time you save, you see what other people have saved. So there's a lot of versions get created when you do it this way. But as you save and other people save, you then can see what they've done. And what ends up happening is the paragraph where the people are working ends up getting locked. So in this case, I was working in one place, Ellen Dixon was working in another place, so she has locked that paragraph, even though the cursor is on the word pollution right in the middle line of the paragraph. I cannot make any changes there because she has it locked. In the basic class, we talked about links to ETRACS. The SharePoint libraries are the official repository for permit documents that are tracked in a separate application called ETRACS. The URL of the document as it sits in SharePoint is what is provided to the ETRACS application. One of the ways to pick up a URL for a link is by clicking on the ellipsis and then right-clicking in the pop-up that appears and copying that, or just using Control-C rather than right-click and copy. That picks up the whole ugly URL, which is then pasted into ETRACS. Another way to pick up a link is to click and drag over the clickable link that's in the file listing in the library. If you right-click on that, you can copy shortcut, and what you get is the long URL. If you right-click on that and use copy, or just use a Control-C, you get the good-looking file name, but it is a true link. What you may remember from earlier presentations is that one of the things that we can create in a library is a link. I have found in looking at the files and folders that have been exchanged between consulting firms and DOT as far as a project is concerned that frequently, in addition to multiple versions getting all tangled up in a library, frequently what happens is that one discipline group produces a report that is used by another. Instead of leaving that report in the author's folder, they tend to copy it into a folder of convenience so it's easy to get at and they know where it is and they don't have to go hunting up and down a tree structure to get it. What ends up happening is the author makes an update and may or may not get the message out to everybody that the file has been updated. As a result, people are making decisions on old information. You also end up with a file that is copied in 5 or 6 different locations, each potentially a different version. If you use SharePoint versioning and you use links to point to these files where they sit, you then have what appears to be your file in your space, but it actually is pointing to another location. So to do that, this is a way of creating those links. First of all, you need to pick up the URL of the file that you want to point to. And one of the most commonly copied files I've discovered in early projects, or the early part of a project, is the traffic forecast. And it's also a file that's frequently updated. So we're going to pick up the URL. Notice we just clicked on it, right-clicked on it. We didn't have to click and drag because all we wanted was the shortcut. That gives us the URL. We're then going to the roadway discipline because it's the hat we're wearing today. Go to the Files tab, click on New Document, pick the middle one, which is the link, paste the URL in the URL field, give it a name. You can give it your own name, or you can use what the original was, in this case, traffic forecast. Because we're in the roadway library, we have roadway topics to assign to this, and the roadway phases, and all the other properties that are familiar to people in the roadway environment. Now notice the state is set to draft. That is not going to go out and look at the traffic forecast sitting in the project development library and update it when it is updated. That is one area that you're going to have to maintain yourself. But you'll always see the current version if the person who's maintaining the file in the project development library does not create a new file of a different name with the new version. Now is your chance to try it.